Welcome everyone, welcome back to those who are in the first panel. Welcome to everyone online. We're running the second panel now at the International Arts and Homelessness Summit. I am Matt Peacock, one of the 4 co-directors at Arts and Homelessness International. It's my absolute honour to be chairing this panel on trauma and arts and homelessness. We have 4 exceptional panelists to talk about this very difficult subject, but a subject that is absolutely central to the arts and homelessness sector and what the arts and homelessness sector can do in this area. We all know, anyone who has worked in the community will know that homelessness is not just about housing, and one thread that runs through everything really is trauma. And how recently, in the last few years, I guess, there's been more talk about how to make trauma informed and increasingly trauma conscious spaces so that people feel as empowered, equipped, safe, brave as they can be in this area, and how the arts can contribute to that. So we're going to talk about this. I'm going to introduce the panel first, and they are going to chat for 2 or 3 minutes about anything they like to introduce themselves, and then we'll go into a discussion that we have co-created the questions for. We are going to start with Christina. So Christina Cooper is from Northumbria University.
Thank you. So yeah, I'm Chris Cooper. And as Matt said, I'm an assistant prof at Northumbria University, and I think the reason we're here today and the reason we got involved with Arts and Homelessness International is because we're on a funded project, funded by the AHRC, UKRI, as you can see on the board there. And we received some money to look at sort of how arts can help people move out from that umbrella of homelessness and that sort of carrying that big heavy label of I am homeless, and start recognising all the assets and skills and things that people come with, and to help them stop being so centralised on just surviving and start thriving again and get involved in community and have fun. And that second sort of picture on there, what we did was we took Tonkin's model of grief, which is around how we grow around grief. The grief never really goes away, we grow around it, and we used that to think about trauma and how we might grow around trauma by making our lives bigger. So the trauma is still there, but our lives are not so focused on it. So yeah, that's kind of the sort of ethos of our project. And then I think if there's a second slide, it just sort of explains the project, because it is a really big project. We have 5 key work packages. The one we're working on right now and the one that's most relevant to this panel is around trauma-informed care, and particularly looking at sort of bringing some of the biological understandings of trauma back. So we've got sort of emotional and social focuses, but because we want to throw away the medical model, and I am completely with that, some of the biological understandings and the impact it has on the way our brains might function gets forgotten. So that work package is around actually how does it impact on people, how does it impact throughout their lives from childhood to adulthood, and how does that impact on their ability to engage with services, and as we'll come on to later, some of the harms that services might do. In the second work package, we're going to be evaluating nationally to see what people are doing well. We're also going to evaluate a local service, Tyne Housing, who have all sorts of wonderful creative activities alongside their health and wellbeing activities and housing, to look at how they're managing to do things so well in their sort of little world, but also how we help people step out of that bubble of safety and back into wider society, and the community assets that are out there, all of the wonderful arts and creative things that people can get involved in, how we help people get the most out of what they want and help them find it, which is the third thing, the big map. We're mapping all of the local organisations that work in homelessness, including creative organisations across the northeastern Cumbria, which is where our project is focused, so that people have got a website that they can go to and they can find either things by need or by service, or just by having a scroll through and seeing what they can find. So that could be used by services trying to help a service user, or it could be used by any one of us to see what's out there. The final work package is where we get really, the fourth work package is where we get really arty and creative. and start thinking about how we can produce art that takes a stand against stigma at all levels, so publicly, in services, whatever it is, self-stigma. How can we recognise all of the assets that we come with and celebrate them in art form? And the final work package is a series of 13 workshops across the 3 years where we bring together practitioners, artists, academics, people with lived experience, most importantly, and we have these really important conversations in the room. So that, in a nutshell, is our project.
Properly exciting. And I think probably, I mean, I don't have absolute proof of this, but I think I don't know of another arts and homelessness related research project that's as big in history or has more funding in history than this. It's really exciting. And there's 200 partners?
Yeah, so we're in contact with about 200 organisations. We've got about 25 sort of active partners who work on the project in some sort of real linked way, and then we've got about 200 so far partners that we're engaging with across the northeast and Cumbria that we're working with. They come to our workshops, usually between 50 and 70 of them, not all 200 of them because we wouldn't know where to put them. We try and do it hybrid, but yeah, it's a big thing, and we're having great fun with it.
Wonderful. Gosh, I'm just already so I just love this panel. Jess Turtle, one of the founders of Museum of Homelessness. I don't know why I said your name twice, but there we go. Over to you.
Matt Peacock. Thank you. Thank you for having me today, Chris. That was really interesting. I can't wait to hear even more about your work. So as Matt said, I'm one of the founders of Museum of Homelessness. The other founder's there, another Matt. And we are the world's first Museum of Homelessness. We've been going for about 10 years. We've just in the last year opened our first bricks and mortar building in Finsbury Park. So please come along every Tuesday. We're open doing gardening and art and having food together and just enjoying each other's company. So you'd be very welcome to drop by. We're grassroots, we're purposefully small. We've now got 15 paid workers working within the charity and about 60 volunteers. We've got flat pay, so everyone gets paid the same, whether you're the director or duty manager, we all get paid the national average wage for museums. And we're sort of like a hybrid organisation, so think of it as a blend of heritage and creative work and direct action and campaigning. And the reason that we do things that other museums might not do is because we are survivor-led. So most of us involved have experience of homelessness. We have different forms of trauma that we've experienced. Many of us are in recovery or in active addiction in the organisation. And the structural traumas that we're facing as a society, and this week is no exception, there's been some significant world events that are very, very frightening. Those structural traumas, when you're a trauma survivor, they're even harder to navigate. So we wanted to set up a museum which could in some way respond to that. Could I see the next slide, please? I can't remember what I put in. Oh yeah, so for trauma survivors to respond to all of this huge mess that we all find ourselves in safely, we wanted to undertake specialist training and development as much as we can. In the last 5 years, we've trained internally with the Polyvagal Institute, Moving the Human Spirit, who do trauma-conscious coaching training. There's 7 of us in the organisation who are trained trauma-conscious coaches now, including me, Matt, and Nell as well, who's one of our crew. Gabor Mate's Compassion Inquiry and Internal Family Systems. These are new modalities which are really teaching us how to heal trauma. And we make this central to all of our work, so it's threaded into our creative work, our community work, and our campaigning work, so that as trauma survivors we can safely heal ourselves actually, and also try and work to heal some of the things that are going on in society. And so some of this thinking I'll be bringing in today to the panel. And then on the final slide, please. This artwork, someone sent me this on WhatsApp. I don't have the attribution of the artist. If anyone knows, please let me know and we'll credit. But I really like this artwork and I share it with my coaching clients and people in our community, because if you look at the process that's being shown here, the most frightening trauma symptoms, and I'm talking about severe addiction, suicidal ideation, within homelessness, sort of maybe constantly returning to the streets or not being able to make those changes, and the things that can feel hardest to work with for yourself or for if you're working with people who are trauma survivors, they can be healed, and they're survival techniques that people developed as a child that are no longer serving them. And when I, as a trauma survivor with significant trauma, childhood trauma, learned about this way of understanding trauma, it was a game changer for me, and I have been able to do a lot of healing in the last few years. So I just wanted to start with that, to show that the most frightening parts of ourselves are the parts that need the most love, and it is only love and deep compassion that will heal it.
Thank you, Jess. Lots of nods, and yes, thank you so much for that. Nell Hardy, who runs a charity that she founded, Responsibility Theatre, and has been on the Arts and Homelessness International Associates Leadership Programme. Over to you.
Hello, thank you. So as Matt said, I am the founder of Responsibility Theatre, which is a theatre and participation arts charity that exists to represent and support people who experience or are at risk of experiencing trauma. And the reason I founded Responsibility Theatre is I came to realise that within kind of arts and social action, specifically theatre and social action, it seemed like there were a lot of groups that brought people together according to certain symptoms of trauma, so addiction, eating disorders, depression, that sort of thing. And there were lots of arts and social action groups that focused on the traumatizing experience, so homelessness, experience of the criminal justice system, etc., etc., etc. And I felt like there was a big gap in the middle, because I think if you're kind of, all of your activism and all of your support system is built around a certain symptom, then you start to feel like you rely on that symptom to get your community and to get your support, and that can be really complicating. And if you are grouped purely by the nature of your lived experience, then kind of, I don't know, especially because of the ways a lot of those experiences, like the people who identify with them, it can kind of start to colour what you think you can do with the rest of your life. And I feel like by just focusing on trauma and saying anybody who has experienced trauma, you can see just the range of people who have similar symptoms to you, who have had similar experiences to you, even if you come from completely different sides of the world and completely different classes and all the rest of it. And you may find that you, as somebody who grew up in a council estate, have more in common with somebody who grew up in a mansion than you do with the person who was next door to you or something. But in the typical kind of boxes that people get put into, you wouldn't necessarily have met that person if you hadn't been brought into that space. So we have a core group that meets monthly to make sure that I'm still doing what the community wants me to do instead of just what I want to do. Anybody can come. You don't have to prove that you're a survivor. You don't have to tell anybody what you've been through. We believe you. We put on productions that kind of reflect on contemporary experiences of our traumatizing world from the point of view of a survivor, because we're sick of big shot producers coming along and taking our stories and romanticizing them and producing beautiful pieces of art that make people think things about trauma that do not serve the people who actually experience it. These stories are better off in survivors' hands. We run workshops that kind of help survivors to work with those sides of themselves in a safer way, and we use creativity and abstraction and metaphor and the body to find ways in which we can play with those things inside of ourselves that are normally shrouded in fear or in shame or in these other things, so that we can be with them for long enough to be able to create something that helps ourselves, helps other people, and creates something beautiful out of something that we thought that we hated. And we also offer trauma conscious communication training to organisations. And what else do we do? We work with researchers quite a lot to help them to communicate the products that they found from the research that they've done into traumatizing elements of our society. And we've also just recently started being able to be part of research processes itself, so kind of delivering theatre workshops as part of the work that is done with people who then get interviewed, to make it a more productive all-around and more pleasant and less re-traumatizing experience for those people. The only other thing that I want to say about Responsibility Theatre before we move on is that, so this was from our production iLord, which explored spiritual abuse, and as well as, I hate this, I still haven't found a proper way to describe this, as well as a professional cast, as well as a cast of people who had previously earned money for performing on a stage and had a lifestyle that meant that they could contribute several days in a row to rehearsing, alongside a group of people who had not been paid before for all of the things that I said before, but were survivors of spiritual abuse. We had a mixed cast, and also the set design and the sound design was co-created with survivors of spiritual abuse from a bunch of different faiths, to make sure that it was something that survivors could be present with, but also accurately and viscerally reflected what it needed to reflect. So in terms of our relationship with homelessness, I have lived experience of homelessness, and to be honest, although, as I said, I don't know the backstories of most of the people that I've worked with, what I've realised about working with trauma survivors is pretty much everybody at least gets homelessness, if they haven't kind of experienced it in any of the definitions that gets bandied about. But it can be from actually not having had a safe place to live. It can be from not having been able to be safe inside their own body. It can be from not having been able to be safe inside their own mind. I mean, we live in these things as much as we live in buildings and in societies, right? So although we're not a homelessness specific organisation, I don't think that I've worked with a single person through our work who hasn't got homelessness. I'll stop talking.
Thank you, Nell. Thank you. And last but very much not least, we have Naila Mohammed, another alumni associate from our leadership programme, and the head and founder of Creatives Talk. Over to you, Nai.
Thank you, Matt. You can call me Nai, it's much easier to say. I'm a solo social entrepreneur, and I'm currently on a master's program in relational social work practice. My CIC, Creative Talks, I founded it in 2021, and I'm currently developing a framework to support myself, individuals, and my community to share their journeys, lived experiences, and turn those experiences into powerful tools of reflection, growth, and opportunities. On the screen, that was my debut of one of my projects, Pain to Purpose. I debuted an episode of the series that I'm going to create, which was actually a conversation between me and my sister, because we both experienced homelessness, but we'd experienced homelessness in different ways. But what we had identified was that hardship actually built a resilience in us that we didn't know we didn't know we had that strength. We didn't really understand our power and being able to overcome the trauma of losing your home and your family and you know, the memories that you built in that space, and having to face, you know, the challenges of bureaucracy and getting support and feeling like you have to beg or meet a threshold to be treated as a human being. So my mission at the moment is combining my creative practice with my social work practice to be able to create this framework, and I'm enjoying the process because I'm understanding that everyone's story has so much power, and when we're able to give space for people to talk about what they've experienced, we are also able to reframe our understanding of pain. And I think that's what's so beautiful about, you know, life, because trauma is a part of the human experience, and if we don't find ways to respond to it in a positive way that like allows us to regulate ourselves, allows us to find connection and build relationships, and even just learn more about you, like what are you capable of achieving. I just think it's a beautiful process, and it's something that society, you know, hides away from or avoids, because a lot of people may understand trauma as something that's shameful, or they may not want to, you know, or may not have the tools to reflect on that pain, and there might not be enough support for them or in their system to be able to process and heal from their hardship. So my mission is just to reframe pain as a source of resilience and empowerment for everyone.
Thank you. Thank you, Nai. That's wonderful. And can we just put our hands together for this amazing panel? Thank you. We have 5 questions, which I'm going to try and ask everyone if we have enough time. And just to kick this off by saying a very obvious thing, that we are talking about trauma here. And if anything that you hear you find resonates with you and you'd like to chat to someone afterwards, if you feel affected by it in any way, I'm a safeguarding officer for the summit. Nell is the same for the festival. And please grab one of us and we'll have a cup of tea and a chat. And that goes for online as well. Please drop us a line. And Ronnie, if you could put my email address in there, that would be brilliant. Thank you. So the first question is the shortest, but perhaps the one with the most opportunity for discussion, which is, can we define what trauma is? Who would like to go first?
I could.
Yeah,
start.
Chris?
Yeah.
Right.
So I think for me, it's if you come to me and you have trauma, it's not about what happened. It's not about the happening and the event. And I think for me, the frustration is that that's where services often focus. If you come to me and you're bleeding and you're hurting and you're physically injured, I'm not going to ask you if it was a car, a bus or a tractor that hit you. That's not going to be my first question. My first question is going to be, where does it hurt? How can I help? And what are you currently doing to try and deal with that? And I think these are the important questions for me around trauma. Trauma is what happens within us. It's the thing after the event. It's the biological, the psychological, the emotional, the physical, everything that happens to us after that event, and the way we then go on and live our lives, and the way that ends up woven through what happens to us and our story from then on in. So for me, it's about the person and all of the things that happen inside us. Whereas I think quite often I find in services, speaking specifically to sort of the quite medical and sort of statutory services that we've worked with, what they tend to focus on is, well, what happened? Tell us all about it. Relive your trauma for us, and then for them, and then for them. And eventually we might do something about what hurts. And I think for me the most important question is, where does it hurt? How can we help? How can we help it hurt less? How can we help from where you are now to where you want to be, and beyond where you can even imagine yourself being eventually?
Thank you. who would like to go next? I don't want us to feel like we're going sort of all the way down the line and then to Nye on screen. Does anyone like to come in?
I've got something to follow on from Chris
Yeah.
says, if everyone else is happy with that. Because that's what I've learned in the training with Gabor Mate. He talks about, so specifically with childhood trauma, it's not the actual traumatic incident, it is when the child isn't able to process that with a significant adult. That's where the damage really occurs, and that's where you get, that's where you'll develop PTSD, etc. So, and there's something about, if you're also not able to feel safely feel anger towards a caregiver because you have to maintain an attachment to that caregiver if you're a young child, then there becomes a lack of ability to go near or process emotional pain. So trauma to me is being an adult but being frozen in time where you're a child and it's not safe to connect with deep pain and anger. We actually have the tools to process that as an adult, but if we're trauma survivors, our system doesn't know that. So relearning how to connect with those emotions and process them safely, that's where the healing happens. Addiction and self-harm and suicidal ideation and all of that is what happens when we're not able to connect with ourselves. So it's a disconnection with self is my definition of trauma.
Great. Nye, do you want to come in next? Just to...
Yeah, I would just add on and just say that, well, then trauma would be a process. It's not like a final state of being, and you know, it's deeply personal, and it's your emotional response to what has happened to you. So, you know, like the ladies have already stated, how we respond to that event depends on, you know, your support system and the coping mechanisms that you've acquired through your journey of development. And if you haven't had that support to actually identify what coping mechanisms actually help you to heal and grow and move forward, then how can you?
I want to just take us back to a really like level one thing here, because we're talking already in quite kind of sophisticated ways, and just the only other thing I have to add is that everyone experiences trauma, that trauma is part of our biological survival mechanisms. Like if people didn't understand, like if people had never had a trauma response before, then people would never jump out of the way when a car's going really fast down the road. You know, trauma is what happens in our brain when we're in danger, and we don't have time to think logically about it. So our brain tells us to go to whatever we did the last time we were in a similar situation that kept us alive. That literally biologically is what it is, and it's a good thing that it's there, because otherwise we wouldn't be able to protect ourselves from extreme harm. And I think that's the thing that really crucially, and I intentionally says because I know what the next question you're going to ask is, and this is a lovely segue. I think this is one of the big mistakes that services make when they handle trauma, is that often if somebody is presenting with symptoms of post-traumatic stress, where you might have that response to things that most people think aren't life or death situations, then they'll treat that as a problem that has started inside your brain. And it's nothing wrong with what's going on in here. It's a problem with what has gone on out here, and sometimes a problem with something that is continuing to go on out here that you can see because of your lived experience that other people can't. And actually, to heal from trauma, yes, in here has to be more forgiving and more trusting and more resilient than it's really designed to do. It has to do an awful lot of work. But really, stuff out there has to change as well. And that is something that services do not acknowledge often enough. So yeah, we all know what trauma is. We all have trauma responses. Post-traumatic stress is when it gets a little bit more complicated.
Thank you, and also for moving us on to the next question, which is about the fact that often the places where we go to get help are re-traumatizing and doing more harm than good. So what is it that services are doing that can exacerbate trauma and PTSD?
Shall I follow on, just because I've kind of introduced us? So my experience of services was certainly that it was inconvenient for there to be more than one thing that was going on with me. And so my experience of homelessness, I spent a lot of it in mental health care. And because services were, constantly, homelessness services are saying, well, you're treating her for a mental health problem, so we can't do anything with her yet. And people on the mental health side of things are saying, well, she's homeless, so we can't really do anything with her. So there's something about the completely baffling division of things that are necessarily interlinked. That is a really, really re-traumatizing thing. And interestingly enough, when I set up Responsibility Theatre, I was making a show about exactly that, about the experiences of homelessness and mental health hospitalisation. And okay, so what I'm experiencing now is my brain playing tricks on me, and what I'm experiencing now is me actually kind of being in danger. And funnily enough, when I was then kind of going out to producers, everyone was saying, we love this is brilliant, but could you please make it either about homelessness or about mental health, because then we'd know how to market it. And I was like, okay, wow. So even the way that we tell stories is dividing this. So our whole society is built on this idea that issues exist in lovely little pockets. And as part of that, I think that when you do present with complications, you can often end up being treated like it's your fault that you can't be helped. And sometimes that comes from frustration on the side of workers, because they're also having to deal with these systems that just will not work together. And because they don't have anywhere else to put their frustration, sometimes it can land on the people that they're working with. I think there's a big thing about passing on information and not passing on information that can be very re-traumatizing. You've spoken already about having to tell your story again and again and again, and God, it's just exhausting across lots of different sectors. I think I'd be really interested to hear the other panel speakers talk about the complexities of this, but there's something about there's a sweet spot, I think, in between making decisions for you and deciding they know what is right for you, and deciding that you need to have autonomy over your own life and therefore doing nothing. And both of those places are very re-traumatizing. And there's a sweet spot in the middle where you're supported to find and do what is best for you. Also, just the inability to say, yeah, what you're going through is really awful. It shouldn't happen to anybody. And instead feeling like there's a need to hide emotions. This is a real core part of the trauma conscious communication training that I lead with workers is I feel like a lot of people have been told that they're not allowed to have emotions in a space, or at least not allowed to show emotions in a space. And I don't know about not showing emotions just isn't a thing. We all show emotions at all time. They're not always happy or sad. Sometimes they are angry or frustrated or tired or hungry, or and if you try not to show emotions, then you come across as a bit frustrated or a bit constipated or a bit bored or weirdly amused. And so there's something about being able to be present with your own emotions whilst still turning up entirely for the other person, that is really crucial and very difficult to get right if you're not supported to do so.
Thanks. Chris, I imagine you see a lot of trauma services.
Yeah.
What's your perspective on how they may be working?
My initial response to the question was kind of, oh God, where to start?
Yeah.
But so I'm going to come at it from the specific focus that we're taking in our project right now, which is what led us here today, I think. And that is from that focus of adverse childhood experiences and how that impacts on brain development. So the evidence tells us that we've looked at that if you have adverse childhood experiences, what happens, and we've spoken about it a little bit already, is you tend to retreat to these very animalistic sort of fear, fawn, whatever you can do to survive kind of responses to things. And what happens is there's less frontal lobe, top-down kind of reasoning your way out of things, because you need to be able to very quickly figure out whether you need to fawn and please the person in front of you or get the hell out of Dodge. So there's that kind of response, and what that does when baby's brain is developing or child's brain is developing is it means you have more development in this hind brain and less development in the front brain. And I know I'm being very kind of medical model here, but it's just to try and bring back some of that biological understanding. I am coming to the services. What that means, so our executive functions, our decision making, our choice making, our timekeeping, our all of those sort of top level ways of being are controlled by our frontal lobes. And if that's impaired because of trauma, then it's no wonder that we're missing appointments, we're struggling to know when Tuesday is. That's something we've come across. They'll say, oh, your appointment's next Tuesday. By the time I've gotten 2 days in, I don't know whether it is Tuesday, whether it's been Tuesday, which Tuesday did they mean? If I'm having an appointment once every 3 weeks, has it been 3 weeks? I don't know where I am in my month anymore. And what we're seeing is these executive function issues. We spoke to some people with lived experience, and what they were describing was not executive function, because that would be a very weird thing to ask people about. It was their engagement with services. But what they were telling us at first I thought was just memory slips, and then started to realise actually we're struggling with organisation, with planning, with carrying out tasks, especially if those tasks are confrontational to the ways that we've learned to survive in the first place. So if we're using drugs as a coping mechanism and someone's trying to take that away, most difficult thing to do in the world anyway, and if you struggle with executive function, even more difficult. And then we look at things like mental health services and other services, and it's 3 strikes and you're out. Miss 3 appointments and you're off our books, you're not welcome back, go away. Well, for someone who can't make it there, and if you think about the process you had to go through to get just here today, which wasn't a threatening situation, or it did feel a little bit maybe like that for some people, but just, you know, planning what train to get, how to get here on time for the conference starting, even in between talks planning, you know, when do I go to the loo and when do I go and get a cup of tea and when do I end up back in the room on time? There's lots and lots of executive function going on, and for me services just are not understanding that we're asking people to do the impossible sometimes without putting in any support to make it possible. So that's where I'm coming at from this at the moment. And I understand that that is a very biological view, and I'm a psychologist by background, so I am much more understanding of the social and the psychological and all of the other elements, but I feel like we're making some inroads in that, and we're making no inroads with those sort of biological understandings anymore.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Jess, any reflections on what the services are doing?
Yeah, well, I had loads as you were both speaking, but I'll try and keep it brief. I think, because I'm thinking a lot about the nervous system as well, Chris, from what you're... So I think the whole neural system we need to pay more attention to. Trauma lives in the body so much, but and that's just not paid attention to. But I just want to raise one thing that really bothers me about services, and it's a particular policy at the moment. If someone has a personality disorder diagnosis and they call mental health crisis team asking for help because they're feeling desperate, they are told that they are high intensity, manipulative, and that they have capacity to harm themselves. Okay, and we are losing people to suicide because of this policy. If someone is presenting with a very young part, which is very scared and needs help and feels desperate, that person needs compassion and deep care in that moment of crisis. And it doesn't matter how many times they've phoned up. So if we could change one thing about services to really save lives and really understand trauma, I would wish it could be that, and it's just not getting dealt with. And it breaks my heart.
Thanks. Nai, over to you.
Oh, I agree with the panel wholeheartedly, and I would just say that when services start listening to their service users and even their practitioners, you know, we would actually be able to support and help people heal and move forward with their lives and with the tools to be able to do that. And I think that's just the problem. You know, we have these rigid policies and frameworks, and they do not speak to people's lived experiences. And if services were more, you know, flexible and actually created a process where you can individualize support, you know, so that you can actually meet that person's need, then, you know, people wouldn't feel dehumanized and the process wouldn't re-traumatize them, you know. And even as well, one thing that I've learned is services tend not to follow up with people that have engaged with their service. You know, feedback is so important because that's where you will, you know, access these stories and actually use that information to improve the service and how you're facilitating the services that you're saying are supposed to help people. There's no point keeping that, like, investing in spaces that truly are just there to meet KPIs. You know, people are more than stats. They actually have so much more value when we listen to them, and rather than telling them what to do.
Thank you. We're going to talk a little bit now about arts, the role of arts and creativity. And I think everyone online and here in London will probably know what it feels like to be in a room or to be on, you know, in a group or on your own, being creative and how that feels, and the incredible impacts of that in terms of well-being, mental health, resilience, community, all of these things. And in a way, I suppose anyone who's involved in arts and social justice or health, homelessness, we're all on this journey of kind of maybe convincing some people that it's really important. It's a need to have, not a nice to have. And I think in terms of this conversation about trauma, it's really interesting. I mean, I remember 20 years ago being part of this panel around neuroscience and how music particularly was being shown to change white matter in the brain, and how that may in the future be a very direct way that music can actually help different pathways in the brain, traumatic pathways. That was 20 years ago. I think there's, you know, in 20 more years' time, there may be even more about this. So the question I want to ask the panel is, what can arts and art spaces do that is different? And I think I'm going to go to Jess first, because you run an art space which is doing precisely some of this.
Oh, thank you. Well, basically, Museum of Homelessness is basically like an extremely extra trauma response. Like, the whole thing is my trauma response. So, you know, the trauma responses can be creative and good. But we've designed everything into the museum. We've developed this thing we call spatial grammar, and it's trying to work with the polyvagal theory, which is about the nervous system and where we get stuck. I can't really summarise it here, like it's a whole workshop, but basically you want to be in what they call ventral vagal, which is the socialisation, calm, connected place where we're not fight or flight, we're not dissociated, we're not completely gone, and we're able to connect with each other and build those relationships. That's where the healing takes place. So we've tried to design all of the museum spaces, storytelling, activities, so that everyone who comes on site, is, as much as possible, is in ventral vagal. And that's the spatial grammar. How's the space talking to my nervous system? How's my nervous system talking to my colleague's nervous system? And we really try and think about it on that basis. So we've had in 18 months being on site, we've had 3 verbal conflict situations, which is quite a limited number of situations for a highly intersectional site with lots of people carrying lots of trauma, so we're really proud of that. But I just wanted to mention about singing, because Matt, you made me think about singing is the art form that hits every single thing that you need to get a person into ventral vagal. So that's why singing and chanting and collective singing and chanting exists in every single culture worldwide, because it's the most healing thing that humans can do together, is to collectively sing in a group. So that's why I think Choir with No Name, Streetwise Opera, doing amazing work, and you can feel it when you're in their rehearsals or concerts. That's everyone in ventral vagal, and it's such a good vibe. We just need to be there as much as we can.
Wow, thank you. Nai, hi. What can arts do that is different?
I think, echoing what Jess said, where words fail, arts can actually give someone that opportunity to express themselves and, bring something out of them that they might not even know that was there. And it is difficult to articulate your experiences, especially when you haven't really had the space to reflect and, or even understand, the power of your pain. So I think art can be a start to that, reflection and, and being around people that can actually support you and actually genuinely care about you. There's no judgment. I felt so supported being an associate because my art practice is unique to me and my lived experience, but just because I'm not an established artist painting and producing all of this work for everybody to see doesn't mean that I'm not an artist, doesn't mean that I'm not a creative. My art is in just living, number one, because human beings, we are art. So everything that we produce is art. And once we actually start to value the power of what we can create just by existing and connecting with each other and building relationships with each other and even supporting each other, we can actually build a society that truly knows how to love and care and provide support. So yeah, that's my hand.
Wonderful, thank you. Nell, over to you.
Cool. So there are two phrases, I suppose, that come to me. The first is agency, and the other is organised chaos. And I'll talk a bit about organised chaos first, I think. I've heard art as a whole defined as organised chaos, and I think that it speaks to something very important about the experience of trauma. I think a lot of people who are traumatised either kind of live in chaos. That's probably the most common picture we have of somebody who is traumatised. But you can also get people who exist purely in the organised, who kind of manage by having every little section of their life very, very, very carefully and meticulously and hypervigilantly worked out. And there's something about art which takes us out of the routines that we've been told are acceptable, or the ways of communicating that we've been told are normal, or that have been set down on the form so that the computer can read it well, and makes it okay to communicate in that way, and finds a way in which others can receive that and understand that, and as a collective you can all respond in some way to it, even if what you're getting from it isn't necessarily what was intended by the other person. And you get this space of organised chaos where people get you in some way. They respond in some way. It's not an instant, you haven't responded in the way that we have offered for you to communicate, therefore we're just not going to respond to it. Like, to me, that's what art is. It's a space where it's a form, but it's a form that's completely blank, and you can choose to screw it up in a ball and juggle with it, or you can draw a picture on it, or you can write some music on it. You can do you, basically, and communicate you in the style that you want to communicate you, and at the pace at which you want to communicate you. I think that's a really important thing to note, is that services often ask people to give them all the information they need instantly. And the important thing about art, as Nye was saying, is that it's a process, and so by working with art you can do that in your own time, and that gives you the opening to be able to use your agency to find which parts of yourself you can share with others at what particular times. So maybe one week somebody asks you how you are or what's going on for you, and you can't respond in words, so you respond in a gesture. Maybe that gesture turns into a dance, or you can draw something and then that drawing can be contributed to. Or maybe you can use words, but the words that come out tell a story about a worm that lives in a sewer and eats pistachios. I don't know. You find a way that works for you and that really allows you to communicate you the best you can, and that means that you still have agency over your own truth, and makes it okay that the person who receives it won't necessarily receive exactly what you meant, because it's a consensual thing that with art you give something out and the person will receive it based on their lived experience and their understanding of the world, and it might influence their understanding of the world going forward, but it doesn't have to conform to their understanding of the world, and it doesn't have to fit within anything. And there's an understanding that the giving of that can change the receiver as much as it can change the giver. There's a mutuality and a consent about that.
Thanks. And we're going to go to questions in 1 second, so if you've got any questions online or in the room, please have them ready. But finally, Chris.
Sorry, I thought you were moving on to the next question. I was going to say you haven't done Chris yet, but carry on.
Chris, I know that the arts component is kind of later on in the project in many ways.
I have kind of got something to say now. So I'd already told Matt that I might not be able to answer this question, and then I was going to answer this question starting with, I'm not an artist, but, and I feel like we've had art stolen from us as children, because we either had to succeed or excel or be able to monetize it. There's an author who wrote The Little Prince, I can't remember his name, do you know his name? Yeah. And you know, he started off by drawing a snake that had eaten an elephant, but none of the adults knew what it was, and he gave up art at the tender age of 6 because he didn't feel understood, and I think I've done that as well, to some extent. I love to draw, and it does get me to that place where I'm really happy, but I don't show it to anyone or share it with anyone or call myself an artist, because it's not what other people might call art. So I think fundamentally we've had art stolen from us, and I think giving ourselves permission to express ourselves and have art back, it's a fundamental part of being human, and I think being allowed to have it back and not have to say I'm good at art because I can create something, but just because I can express myself is important, and I think that in itself facilitates huge growth. So that I think is an important point for me, is that we need to reclaim art and feel valid in it, and validate ourselves and feel proud of something we've produced, whether it would be classed as something that could be sold in a museum or not your kind of museum, I'm sure it could. but yeah, just one of those ones. Just being allowed to produce and be proud of ourselves and be proud of the things we create and feel valued.
Yeah. So The revolution starts here.
Can I just really crucially put in a request that the Museum of Homelessness puts as like a testimony on its website, one of those ones.
Yeah.
Oh, we're not one of those ones, because I think what I was referring to is one of those ones that says art is only one of them.
Not
whereas
one of
you
those
say,
ones,
come
all
on in, be with us, and that's so cool.
So we're almost out of time, but I may just go on 5 minutes, if that's okay with everyone, 10 minutes. Ronnie.
I'm going to pass this around just quickly to say that about a third of the group is actually online. So, just to say well done to Anna, Avery, Baresh, Charlotte, there's so many online, Claudia, and also that I think it was Avery mentioned at the top what you were saying, Dr. Cooper was talking about re-traumatizing. She found that very poignant, and the project she's done in her art groups and homeless groups, she's found that they kind of revolve completely around their trauma. The workshops they do, it seems to be a daily experience, and there's little opportunity for unhoused folks to express themselves without reliving that pain. So just wanted to get that out. I'm going to pass this around. I can pass it to you first because you had your hand up.
Thank you very much. I wanted to pick up on what Nell said about services finding it inconvenient when you've got multiple things going on, and also what Dr. Cooper said in regards to executive decisions. And also I want to kind of maybe get you guys to kind of like speak about what the conversation is at the moment in regards to neurodivergence. And addressing trauma with people who have neurodivergent needs, and what maybe any thoughts or reflections on that.
Do you want to go?
Yeah, I think a discussion we had in the office just the day before yesterday was around there's neurodivergence as in what's clinically sort of labelled, but I don't know anyone that has trauma and who doesn't have neurodivergent or neurodivergent needs. It impacts all of us in different ways. So we were talking about, we have people who we've talked to who will say, oh, it's my ADHD or it's my OCD or even my schizophrenia, and they haven't necessarily been given a clinical label. Some of them have, but what they've heard is a description of something that they identify with fundamentally. So I think what I'd like to see from services is them being trauma aware, as in being neurodiversity aware and trained regardless of the source of that neurodiversity. So regardless of any label you've already been given or any label you choose to give yourself, as you have the right to do, people are prepared to be understanding and not just, you can only have the help if it's there as a clinical label.
Yeah, the most common responses I come across in terms of people being refused services because of neurodivergence and or trauma, I agree completely that, I mean, that the jury is kind of out, as far as I understand it, with in the academic world as to whether trauma is a form of neurodivergence, because it's not from birth, but it does change the way that your brain works.
100%.
So, the two most common I hear is, sorry, you're too complex for us to work with you, and you're not complying with the process, therefore there's nothing we can do for you. And those just, I mean, why are you there? Literally, why are you there if you can't work with people who need... I mean, these teams tend to be called complex care teams, don't they? So if you can't support people who are complex, why are you there?
They're looking for complicated sets of one issue, not complex, intersectional. Scary.
Yeah, exactly. I feel like it's a fear of accountability to an extent. Like it's a fear of taking someone on and then not being able to deliver. I also see this a lot with the inability to say sorry in services. Like saying sorry is accepting that you did something wrong, which then could open you to legal this or that or the other. And actually, we're all going to make mistakes. We're all like, the number of mistakes I'm going to make running. I keep telling my group, I'm going to mess this up. I'm going to mess this up so many times.
I'm telling myself that after 25 years.
Right.
Should we take another question, or is there any other points?
No, that's good.
So I just want to get around as many questions as possible. Andre?
I think what happens is, and you've definitely pressed on it. There's this idea that your trauma has to conform. Even your trauma has to fit into their boxes, and if they want you to regurgitate it so that they can hear a story, because people love stories, and then if you don't want to regurgitate it, if you think, oh, well, what, you know, they look on that as denial, as if denial isn't just another useful tool as well. Denial is another tool that's actually quite useful, because while you're acting, while you're doing other things, while you're in denial, your brain doesn't stop processing stuff just because you're not actively thinking about it all the time. So it's kind of, it's forcing trauma onto trauma onto trauma and not giving you space to kind of process it yourself or do something else to take your mind off it. Not entirely, but you know what I mean? There's a whole toolbox of stuff we use that is denied us because we need to tell a story and conform to their idea of trauma, or they being a sort of systemic thing, not an individual or a person, but anyway, just that.
Nye or Jess, do you want to respond to this?
Just 100% yes. Agree, Andre. Thank you. Phrased it very well there.
Nye, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, I've seen it in practice. You know, if your experience doesn't meet a threshold, you know, they're not helping you. So, and that has been traumatizing for me, you know, especially when it's people that have similar races to me, or, you know, that are, they're saying it's a housing issue, and it's not, because this family do not have anything, they don't have any support, and you're just saying it's a housing issue, but you also say that the child welfare is paramount, so it's not making sense, you know, if it doesn't, like you said, Andre, if it's not fitting their story or their narrative of what trauma looks like, then you're left to your own devices, and so many people are suffering because of that rigid structure and these rules around what your experiences should be in order for you to get help, and it's sad. It's really sad.
Thank you. I think maybe one final question. We'll just see how go for it. Yes, please.
I've got a quick question on the ethics of cultural capital, and I was so interested by various different responses from all of you about essentially how can we empower survivors more through processes of making work with them, and how can we prevent stories being stolen and upheld by people who are not agents of change in the way that we need.
Resource survivors to do our own work.
Yeah.
It probably is like the simple answer to that. And it's something we think about a lot in Museum Homelessness, because museums are extractive. So we've tried to figure out the best way of telling people's stories for them as a collective group. And it's in no way like as ethical as we would wish it to be, but it's the closest that we can get to making the cultural process therapeutic, supportive and representative without re-traumatising people. So I'll be happy to talk about that, you know, after.
I think just quickly, academia is the same. It can be extractive, and we've just had to work really hard to make sure that our processes are not, and that we're true to people's stories. We've got a lot of people with their own lived experience in the team. I myself have lived experience of homelessness. So we try and we're very passionate about being as true to people's stories as we can, and making sure that we don't exploit them, and valuing their voice and letting them tell the stories, and we're really just there to help them get it to the places they want it to go, and seeing ourselves as a bit of a sort of support rather than the top-down controllers of anything.
Within theatre it's really challenging because there are kind of lots of elements and skill sets that go into it that often people who have experienced trauma, especially kind of socioeconomic trauma, haven't had the opportunity to build the skills that are necessary, or just don't have the equipment to do some of the necessary things. And it's one of the reasons why I had to start my own company, is I constantly came up against, well, that's not really how it works. The arts do not work. That's the point of art. They do not work. And so like within RAT, it's something that we've noticed a lot, is I tend to spend quite a lot of time upskilling people because I want their art, but the funders want it to be at a certain kind of, what do they call it, that awful phrase, like production values. They want, they want it to look snazzy and to this and that and the other that require a certain amount of training and money and all of those sorts of things that I think most people who would really respond to the work would be perfectly fine without. But to get a lot of other people to think, well, I'll go and see this instead of going and seeing Guys and Dolls, they need that. So yeah, it takes quite a lot of money, and it takes quite a lot of time and quite a lot of patience, and typical funding models don't respond very well to any of those things. So it's an uphill climb and involves a lot of people like us doing an awful lot of work to get not very far, but we do. It is kind of 5 steps forward, 4 steps back most of the time, which is still 1 step forward.
Yes.
So, yeah.
I'm so sorry. I think we're going to have to leave it there to give everyone a break. Kathy, I hope you can ask your question offline. I'm just going to end really naughtily. This is a bit unscripted. There was one other question about can trauma be healed. I'm going to add, can arts have a role in healing trauma? I'd like a yes, no, or maybe from each of you for those 2 questions. So it could be yes, yes, no, yes. Is that okay?
Can be healed? Not fully ever,
Yes.
I don't think.
Nigel, do you want to start?
Oh, yes, yes.
Nell?
No. I hate that I can't say anything else, but you've given me rules.
You can say maybe. Or for both of those.
Or I'm going to speak. I'm going to defy you. I don't think trauma can be healed, but I think trauma can heal. Trauma requires agency, and if you tell it to heal, it will not do what you tell it. But
It's a part speaking there.
that's a part
Defy a
speaking
part,
there.
yeah.
Thank you.
We love them. I do believe recovery is possible. I do believe healing is possible, and I think the arts is a big part of it.
I think partially possible, but yes, art is huge.
Great. Please, on behalf of everyone online, everyone here, we have just witnessed an amazing panel. Thank you so much for today and what you do. Ladies and gentlemen, the wonderful panel. Please check out the work of Chris and colleagues at Northumbria University, Museum of Homelessness, Responsibility Theatre, Creatives Talk. You can find it all online. There's lunch now for those here. It's next door.
I'm hungry.
We'll see everyone else at 2 o'clock for the
Can
next
I do
panel.
one shameless plug, Matt?
Yes.
Shameless plug. We are launching a trauma conscious leadership programme for people working in homelessness, where we'll be doing a year's programme. We've got funding to pilot that, so a lot of things I talked about today will be within that development programme. So that'll go live quite soon. If you're interested, please apply.
Thank you.
That's it. That's my shameless plug.